If everyone fought for their own convictions, there would be no war.
But there would still be presidential war.
Presidential war. What is it good for intellectual stimulation? Say it again now. Presidential war. What is it good for presidential? Presidential war.
Hello and welcome to the Dead Presidents Podcast. I'm Stephen Lincoln Douglas.
And I'm James J. Hamilton.
And we're back with another exciting installment of America's favorite game, Presidential War. And we're also back with another special guest. A returning special guest.
That's right. Elliott Burns, a returning champion of Presidential War. Welcome, Elliott.
Hello.
Welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me.
The first guest we ever had on the podcast. Back for more.
We'll see if he could keep his streak alive against Stephen Lincoln Douglas, the Barry Horowitz of Presidential War.
That's right. In his first appearance during Season 1, Elliott defeated me. And this time he's going to go up against Stephen Lincoln Douglas in the 5-card draw variety of Presidential War. Contestants can draw their 5-card hands.
Alrighty, 5 cards apiece. And we'll see what category we get here. As official, James J. Hamilton gets this game underway.
First category, post-presidential accomplishments. Now, who do we have?
We have John Quincy Adams, and he's going up against Thomas Jefferson.
Wow. Elliott Burns has John Quincy Adams. Stephen Lincoln Douglas, Thomas Jefferson.
Well, immediately you have John Quincy Adams' triumphant return to the House to say for him, Jefferson, the sage of Monticello, in a sense.
But he did emancipate a few people. A select few.
That's true.
There's that going for him. John Quincy Adams with no one to emancipate.
Well,
From the beginning.
John Quincy Adams working on toward general emancipation.
Right.
Helping also the slaves on the Amistad.
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a storied post-presidential career with John Quincy Adams. Basically, John Quincy Adams, pre- and post-presidency, pretty awesome. Thomas Jefferson, pre- and presidentially, really stand out. Post-presidency, I mean, he's still writing. He's doing all kinds of things in terms of intellectual pursuits. He's coming up with different inventions.
That's right. I mean, he also worked to establish the University of Virginia.
Yeah, there's a lot there.
Yeah, that was probably his proudest post-presidential accomplishment.
Well, that's on his tombstone and not the fact that he was president.
Yeah.
So there's that. I just feel like it kind of pales. I mean, I don't want to say it pales in comparison, but getting back into the House and
Homie had a garden
and stuff.
of plants from all over the world that weren't anywhere else in America.
Well, yeah, that's another
least
thing
in the
about these
movie.
two. These are two great intellects,
Because he
two
was
scientific minds.
he was the one that went over to Europe during the Revolution because his father sent them, right? And he worked with Russia and France.
Yeah, I mean, he had a huge pre-presidential career.
Yeah, I mean, Thomas Jefferson, even though he did do some things, he did essentially retire after
And that's just it.
he was president, whereas John Quincy Adams did not.
Yeah,
He went back into the House and...
kind of vindicated any, shortcomings at his presidential term.
Yeah, he fought for a lot of worthy causes. And
Yeah, I'm
probably right there alongside William Howard Taft in terms of serving in public office after the presidency.
Yeah, I'm leaning towards John Quincy Adams here.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think Elliott is going to take the hand.
All right.
Next category, who would make the best Treasury Secretary? You had to appoint one of the presidents in your hand to serve in the cabinet as Treasury Secretary. Who has the financial acumen? Elliott played Woodrow Wilson, Stephen Lincoln Douglas, James K. Polk.
Yeah, I believe I played him previously in this, and it's just because of his work ethic, his dedication to the task at hand. I feel whatever job he was given, he was going to put himself into 100% and probably keep good track of the nation's finances. Even as president, I mean, he is micromanaging everything. He knows what's going on with Treasury Secretary Robert Walker. He's not in the dark about anything, is Polk. I feel like he'd probably be adequate.
Yeah, and as president, one of his top priorities that he accomplished was to establish the independent treasury.
Yeah, pretty big step.
Hold government funds after Andrew Jackson had killed off the Bank of the United States.
Indeed.
Mine was mostly around him being the president of Princeton because he knew how to go get money from donors. So he could raise funds very well for the U.S. And there's never been a university that's misspent funds. Ever.
Yeah, that's never happened.
One time. But
Yeah.
he would have had a connection to every economist in the nation, having been the president of Princeton, so he would have had people in his back pocket that he could go and call upon for help. Other
That's
than
true.
that, though, the governor of New Jersey is probably the most different state from every other state in the country during the time where he would have been Secretary of Treasury.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Polk establishing the independent treasury, Wilson as president establishing the Federal Reserve,
Right.
which kind of ultimately replaced the independent treasury. Wilson, yeah, he's responsible for one of the major kind of financial reforms, one of the longest lasting and most influential.
Yeah, I mean, I think my argument here is I'm thinking about what Woodrow Wilson left Warren Harding to inherit in terms of the economic state of the country.
Well, it's true. I mean, there was World War One, but
Well, yeah.
that being said, Wilson increased the national debt from about $3 billion to about $26 billion.
Yeah.
Also, a flu that hit after that also caused a downturn in the economy.
Yeah, that was not helpful. I don't know. I mean, if there's anything as a tiebreaker, I would think that Polk would have more of, like, the temperament of a cabinet secretary.
Yeah, Woodrow Wilson was pretty high on himself.
He never really had a job in his life where he, like, worked under someone.
I was trying to think of them both as wartime presidents and wartime expense, and, like, how Polk handled... Of course, it's two completely different times,
Yeah.
but the way Polk
Both of them
handled
sent
the...
troops to Mexico.
Well,
I
that's
never
true.
thought how many different parallels these two have.
Yeah. But
Polk.
the way Polk managed the
winning in
finances of the
Mexico.
war, whereas Wilson just dumps a bunch of money, I feel like Polk might be the more fiscally responsible.
I think it was Coolidge who would go on to say that it's real easy to spend the government money because it doesn't appear to belong to anybody.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
that's something that you could get from being a university president when you have
$200 million.
millions and millions being just donated in.
Princeton must have been in the hundreds of millions at least at the turn of the 20th century.
I mean, I think it was less at the time that Wilson was in there, but it was, I mean,
But it's
probably translated to today's dollars. It was up there.
I think Princeton today is at like $150 billion of endowment.
Trying to recall the Wilson episode, but I think when he became Princeton president, its endowment was something like 3 or 4 million.
So nothing.
And he had a plan that would require like 12 million, and then he went out and raised the money. But considering translating that to today's dollars, but yeah, universities, they're sitting on some pretty big chunks of change.
Indeed. Well, we've had some arguments laid forth. We'll leave it in the hands of the official.
Well, if I have to make a ruling here, I would probably give it to James K. Polk. And thus,
I'm gonna argue.
Stephen Lincoln Douglas. Each contestant taking one hand so far. And we'll move on to the third category, which is going to be who would make the best military general. Elliott Burns playing Richard Nixon. Stephen Lincoln Douglas going with Gerald Ford.
All right, here's in my mind, Nixon's like a cigar-chomping, drinking general. He's like, oh, come on, we gotta get everybody in here. And then things are going bad, and he's like, oh, fuck. And then they bring in General Ford to try and restore confidence in the troops. I mean,
I don't remember bombing Laos under Ford, though.
right.
It's because
Under the
Nixon
sword.
won the Vietnam War.
Yeah, he won the war before he
in
could get in there.
Yeah.
All it takes is giving your soldiers Agent Orange poisoning.
Well, I would say he achieved peace with dignity.
Yep.
As long as for every American soldier that gets Agent Orange poisoning, there
You kill 100 amount of Vietnamese. Yeah.
And that makes it all worth it. Well, both of these men served in the military during World War II. Nixon in the Navy, rising to the rank of lieutenant commander.
I think Nixon was actually fairly good in the Navy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, nothing to sneeze at.
Cited for meritorious and efficient performance. Gerald Ford, also in the Navy, also rising to the rank of lieutenant commander.
Yeah, there we go.
Pretty interesting.
2 lieutenant.
I think
Commanders
Ford
of the
was the
Navy.
one that put college off, too, for World War II, right? I don't think Nixon had to.
Was Ford out of college by the time of the war?
He was,
Yeah.
because he had already gone through Michigan and
Yeah, he graduated.
passing up on the NFL.
Yeah, he graduated Michigan in 1935.
I'm not sure where Nixon went to college at all.
Whittier College?
Yeah, Whittier. But, yeah, so you got some similarities here. They both, played some football. Jerry Ford particularly excelling in that regard. Ford, the more athletic of the two. Although, I don't know if that necessarily helps a general out at this particular time. No, in the days of Washington and Harrison and Taylor, it certainly would help to be
Athletic.
athletic and physically fit.
But how in shape was Sherman whenever he burned Atlanta? Because Nixon could have done Nixon's March to the Sea in Vietnam
I think
pretty
Sherman
easily.
would kick Nixon's ass.
Hand to hand, but Nixon wouldn't use some F-4 Tomcats to drop a whole bunch of napalm, even if it hit his own troops, as long as it got Ford.
I suppose that's true. It's I don't know what how Ford would have handled the Vietnam War.
There's most likely a conscience in Ford that there isn't in Nixon. That could be really good for a general.
That's a pretty solid argument. I don't know if I'm going to deny that.
It's genuinely... I actually just read the Reddit post about right as they returned from the moon, but they placed a plaque by Nixon that we came here in peace for all mankind, and then they returned back to Earth. They visited 24 countries in 74 days, and they went to like 73 cities. And they gave everybody a peace plaque in 1969 about how America was so peaceful and that space should be a peace frontier. And I believe it was at the same exact time that they did their greatest carpet bombing in Vietnam with B-52s.
Well, I think Richard Nixon's going to take this hand for having no conscience.
Yeah, I mean, I think he would be the more
Good general.
devious and ruthless general.
Yeah, maybe he would be the more Sherman.
And it never made the news that he kind of used that moon tour to kind of fill up the front page of the paper as he dropped more napalm than he's ever dropped ever.
A solid argument.
It's pretty savvy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's going to give Nixon the hand.
Nixon taking this one for Elliott Burns. We'll move on to our third category, Well, too bad you wasted that Gerald Ford card, because this one is who would you pick first in flag football?
Bill Clinton.
The coolest on the uncoolest.
Elliott with Calvin Coolidge.
Who he is, I'm guessing you're referring to Coolidge as the coolest.
No, Clinton's the coolest president we've ever had.
Yeah, he's pretty cool. With that saxophone.
Calvin
Arsenio
Coolidge.
Hall.
Yeah.
Smooth talk. Calvin Coolidge with that high-pitched, nasally twang.
But that's why I would think for flag football, that would be Calvin Coolidge's sport that he would get way too into than anybody should be. And would cry over the rule book.
Oh, I don't think he would say a word about it.
He would be a very, very intense gym flag football player. And I don't think that Clinton would even show up to gym. I think he would have slept with a teacher during gym class.
He'd be under the bleachers.
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of shape, I mean, Coolidge is a hard-working farm boy, you know.
Yeah, he was pretty thin.
Clinton, I mean, in his younger days, I mean, he wasn't in bad shape, but you know, he's more known for jogging to McDonald's for his exercise.
Yeah, I don't know. Neither of these two particularly athletic.
Yeah, I mean, this is a tough call. We're looking at both of them in their prime.
Coolidge would be more athletic, and he would be the quiet type of weird kid that would do really well at flag football. And then Bill Clinton would probably be able to just talk off the loss and have won that way.
Coolidge had...
He had some health problems.
He had
when he was
asthma.
young.
His asthma probably wouldn't help him. He's 5'9". Bill Clinton is 6'2.5". He would have a bit of a height
He
advantage.
definitely didn't have asthma because he smoked cigars.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like, Clinton with the reach
It's not all he
advantage.
did with cigars.
Yeah, that's true. I feel like in his youth, he'd probably be a more solid pick than Coolidge. I feel like Clinton would get picked before Coolidge
Yeah,
would.
you
in
can't
the
beat
lineup.
a height. 6'2" beats 5'9" every time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'd probably go with Bill Clinton just for his being taller and a little more healthy. We're down to the final card in our first hand, and the category is whose family member would make the best president. Now, this is a category where you got to choose another member of this president's family, either his parents, his children, his siblings, of who could plausibly be president in their own right. Elliott is Millard Fillmore.
I've got John Adams.
Well,
There's quite a few choices with John Adams. I mean, you could say John Quincy Adams, but
who did
Yeah,
become president?
he did become president, but not necessarily a great one. But I'm thinking I'm going to go Abigail Adams. Throw a curveball in there. I think Abigail Adams.
Well, I think the problem with my pick is that Millard Fillmore probably has a lot of bastard children out there from being our best-looking president.
Well, he might have some bastard children in the English royal family because
After the Queen's
it was
comments,
Queen Victoria who thought he was the best looking man.
he might have somebody in politics in Europe that we would not be aware of.
Let's see.
Other than that, I can't name a Fillmore.
Fillmore's son, Millard
Siblings, kids.
Powers Fillmore, studied law at Harvard and served as private secretary to his presidential father, then became a lawyer in Buffalo and a federal court clerk.
He's got the background for it.
Yeah. Millard Fillmore's father, a generally unsuccessful farmer.
Yeah, really stubborn farmer, moved from rocky ground to clay ground. And didn't have
Got
much
it.
luck with either.
Had sold a bill of goods on a land title at one point.
I think would really be easy to call John Adams the winner on that.
Yeah, I mean, Millard Powers Fillmore would be the best bet for him.
If it were more modern, he could win because he was probably very good looking. And that's what can win you an election post 1960.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I went with Abigail Adams because she was so ahead of her time in terms of her statements on important issues such as women's rights, and she just she had a sound mind. I think she could have been pretty successful if anybody let her get anything done.
Yeah.
She might have ended up having a presidency much like her son John Quincy did. A lot of great ideas, but nothing getting done.
Yeah, I mean, during her time, if women were accepted in the realm of politics, she would have been great at it.
Well, her presidency could have ensured that women had an equal say.
Mm-hmm.
I think she trumps Millard Powers' film.
I mean,
100%.
John Adams is one of the best cards you can have in this category. We're going to draw another 5-card hand. Move on. Is that 5? To another category. Most accomplished vice president. Now this category includes a vice president up to and including his vice presidency, but it doesn't count for his post-vice presidential accomplishments.
Alrighty. I went with Dwight D. Eisenhower, thereby Richard Nixon.
I have Dick Cheney.
Negative.
Bush's vice president wasn't Dick Cheney?
You have H.W. Bush.
You got the elder
Senior.
Bush.
I honestly thought that Dick Cheney was the VP under both.
No, you got Dan Quayle, and let me show you something.
Yeah.
Dick Cheney was the Secretary of Defense under Bush Sr.
Here's your choice right here.
Dan Quayle.
In the sole issue of Great Morons of History comic, Dan Quayle. A poor miscite on the part of Elliott Burns.
My Bush Senior was a VP to Reagan. I may have misunderstood the category, and I also misunderstood who George Bush Senior's VP was. I legitimately thought that it was Nixon or Cheney.
Yeah, I mean, Richard Nixon, you got the Alger Hiss case. He's making a name for himself during the second Red Scare.
He did appear on our top 5 best vice presidents.
Yeah, he had a pretty successful vice presidency. He's doing more for the role of vice president than maybe anybody up to that point, and probably more than anybody until you get to Walter Mondale.
In this publication, Dan Quayle's physically licking George Bush Sr.'s boots.
Keeping the president's boots clean for him with your own tongue.
I cannot believe I thought Dick Cheney was actually VP under George Bush Sr. I had no idea.
Well, it's all part of the learning process that comes with the Dead Presidents podcast and part of presidential war. You win some and you lose some. Unfortunately, you lost that hand.
Vice President Nixon. Moving on to the next category. Best president overall.
And I gotta go with him because he's top 3 on pretty much every list. FDR.
Oh, that's the toughest battle.
And you got basically number 1 on most lists.
Yes.
Abraham Lincoln going up against him. I'm not going to argue. Lincoln, I think, is better overall than Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Roosevelt is almost universally seen at 3. Lincoln, mainly number 1, but if he's not 1, he's 2. And Washington making up the triumvirate there. I mean, FDR, I think he had a strong third term. A very strong third term.
Yeah, FDR is one of the more complicated presidents to kind of rank. I feel.
That's for sure.
His post-World War II stride was a lot better than what Lincoln had set up. Both died before their wars ended. Well, not really, but both died before Reconstruction in Europe or in America. And FDR's Reconstruction, sort of from hanging the Nazis, worked out a lot better than letting them come back and take positions of power.
He got to be succeeded by Harry Truman instead of Andy Johnson.
Yeah. That helps.
Which may be a little bit of a knock on Lincoln that he didn't.
It wasn't Lincoln that said, I want Andy Johnson.
That's true.
You know, but I can't not give this to Lincoln.
You gotta give it to Lincoln.
To beat either of those two, we're going to have to be invaded by aliens and win.
Alright, our next category. Who would make the best legislator? Which president would serve well in Congress or a state legislature, making laws? And who do we have here?
I went with Benjamin Harrison.
Andy Johnson.
Alrighty. Ben Harrison, I went with, he had a pretty successful run in the Senate, and he was not necessarily a kingmaker, but he had a pretty huge role in 1880 Republican convention. Indiana, pretty important state to garner delegates from, and he was the guy to go through in order to get that to happen. So he had some pull in the Senate, knew a lot of people from serving in the war, so he had a lot of respect, a lot of friends. Pretty important senator is Ben Harrison, getting nominated for the presidency after actually not winning a re-election bid in the Senate. But for a good while there, he was pretty important in there. As for Andy Johnson, really a man of the people who kind of rose through local and state ranks and then got into the Senate.
Yeah.
And stood on the right side of history when it came to not leaving the Union.
Well, in the Senate, Andy Johnson championed the Homestead Act, which ended up being finally passed in 1862 to grant public land out west to settlers, which was one of his big reforms for the working man. To try to get them some opportunities that he didn't have as a young man. Andy Johnson championing opportunities for poor white men to the exclusion of red and black men.
Yeah.
It still passed legislation, though.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to argue. I think Johnson wins it. I think he had more experience. He was in there longer. Harrison's coming off the Civil War, and yeah, he's dictating Indiana's electoral votes and shit, but...
I mean, he rose because of his grandfather, correct?
The Harrison family goes way back,
Yeah.
like, to the Declaration of Independence.
Yeah,
And
that certainly, I'm sure, helped him.
yeah. In any event, I still think Andrew Johnson wins this.
We'll let Andy Johnson, with his vast legislative experience, take the hand. We'll go on to our next category. Looks. Who is the best looking president in your hand?
I had Millard Fillmore the last time.
Well, I think you went with a good choice.
All right, I'm going with Elegant Arthur over here.
Elliott has Warren G. Harding.
Well, Harding's going to take it.
Yeah, Harding, famously irresistible to women.
I mean, early on, he had the looks of an actor or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, Harding probably take it there over Arthur. Arthur, I mean, you know, he had good style, but
Yeah, Arthur may be the best dressed,
yeah, certainly
most stylish president.
most stylish, but that isn't to say the best looking.
Warren Harding, pretty handsome man, and a lot of women thought so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no argument for me here. Harding takes it.
Warren Harding running away with the looks category. That brings us to the last category of this 5-card hand, and it is pre-presidential accomplishments.
And I don't feel too bad about who I'm left with. Herbert Hoover.
Yeah.
Well, hey,
Yeah.
Elliott with James Buchanan. James Buchanan, obviously, a very lengthy career, holding all kinds of different posts. He's Secretary of State under Polk, though not the most successful amongst Secretary of States, but he's minister to Russia at one point under Andrew Jackson.
He's been in the House, he's in the Senate.
Yeah, long time.
Minister to
congressional
Britain.
career, minister to Britain.
I mean, if you just look at a list of the posts he holds, he's got one of the more impressive pre-presidential just resumes.
Yeah.
Not that he had a lot of signal accomplishments in those posts.
No, it's just he was there for a long time.
He was around.
Yeah.
And he was hanging in there.
Hoover, I immediately think of relief for Belgium, humanitarian efforts in the First World War. That's where Hoover really shines.
He ran the Food Administration. He was a very successful engineer.
Yeah, it's
had a pretty
it's pretty much
unconventional
up
path
until
to
he's
the
president.
presidency.
He's another one that once you get to the presidency, it's oof. But pre and post, not too awful much to speak of. He hung in there a long time, but his pre-presidency pretty strong, pretty solid.
Hoover 8 years as Commerce Secretary under Harding and Coolidge.
Mm-hmm. And maybe he's hit or miss there, but I'd look more at the humanitarian efforts than anything else with him and the way he organized the relief over there. I mean, that's his shining moment. I don't think anybody would call James Buchanan a humanitarian.
I don't know what to call James Buchanan. I don't know enough about James Buchanan to know anything.
I feel like he was just one of them people that are just around forever. And then finally, just by virtue of being around so long, they shove him into the presidency because they don't have anybody else they think is going to win.
Very similar to the other PA president, Biden.
Yeah,
Well, he was
right.
born in PA, but
Yeah.
I'd consider him more
Delaware.
because he was senator from Delaware.
But he did live here for 6 whole years.
My dad.
Yeah.
This is no joke. It's for real. He came home. He says, Joe, I lost my job. I said, Dad, why'd you lose? He said, I did. And my mom, she said, that's the cookie. The way it crumbles.
Well, he lost his job because of Herbert Hoover.
I think he lost it for raging alcoholism.
Oh, that's for a future episode to get to the bottom of.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. In any event, though, I think I'm leaning towards Hoover sucking this one up.
Yeah,
I would agree.
I think you got to give it to Hoover. Hoover accomplished a lot despite not necessarily being in kind of the big name positions, whereas Buchanan was in a lot of those positions without accomplishing much other than getting those jobs.
Well, and I mean, some of them, it's like Jackson made him minister to Russia because he was like, I don't even want him around.
Mm-hmm.
You would forget, too, that engineering before the time of computers was literally hand math.
Oh, I mean, yeah,
It was
no denying Hoover was a smart
insane.
dude. And let's see who we got in our next draw.
We've got another 5-card hand drawn in another category. Who would win in a fight? Which president do we got going toe-to-toe?
I went with Andrew Jackson.
Oh.
Ulysses S.
Yeah.
Grant.
I think it'd be a great battle.
2 successful generals. 2 aggressive generals.
I think Jackson a little bit
More
more
aggressive.
known for being physical.
Yeah. He did beat up his assassin
Yeah,
in front of everybody.
Mm-hmm.
attempted assassination by Richard Lawrence. Andrew Jackson thrashing him with his cane. Yeah, I don't have any doubt that Grant's a tough guy. But I think Jackson's a wispy dude. I mean, he's tall, but boy,
He has a
he's
cane.
rail thin.
He has
Yeah.
a cane that he beats people with, though.
And if you're looking in their prime, I mean, they're both pretty tough. I feel like Jackson's more scrappy than Grant.
What's their height? Do we have that in the book? I would say that would probably be the determining factor.
I think Jackson's over 6 foot. Grant, I want to say, is like 5'9", 5'10".
Grant seems very mild-mannered outside of the Army. He's a failed
Yeah.
businessman multiple times over.
Jackson, long and lean, standing 6'1" and weighing 140 pounds.
Oh, yeah.
That's
he's
incredibly
a rail.
thin.
So he was very thin.
But wiry, though.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he's got that
Yeah, the
rage,
reach around it.
that rage
Yeah.
temperament where I could see him going into Mr. Backlund mode and, like, just choking somebody out, like, ah!
He could also be kind of sickly at times. I mean,
Well,
he's debilitated by diarrhea at various points.
Well, he's carrying
Didn't
a
he-
bullet around.
That could help you in a fight.
He wrote.
If you diarrhea in the middle of the fight, you will win.
Chances are, yeah.
Hmm?
Chances are your opponent is walking away.
Ulysses Grant, 5 feet 7 inches.
Oh, he was shorter than I even thought. I thought he was like
He wouldn't
5'9".
be able to land a punch until Jackson already had a hold of him.
And Grant a little more stocky.
Yeah.
I think it would be
Grant would be
pretty good
probably
fight.
blackout drunk and not feel a lot of the punches in the beginning. He would have drunk rage that
Trying
he'd
to pass
call
him
on.
out.
Could be. Yeah, this might depend whether you have sober or drunk Grant.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think you'd be able to harm a drunk Grant. I think that he could absorb a lot from pure alcoholism. It would be very quick for him to turn.
Yeah, this is a
I
tough
do
call.
think Jackson would still beat him, though, just with the reach and the hatred that he seemed to have.
Yeah, I think if anything, yeah, Jackson's height advantage and just his intensity.
That's where I'm leaning, is just his, I mean, the man was, some people argue that he might have been legitimately crazy.
Yep. Slaughtering people after the war had ended. And what you called, was it a channel of death that he created in New Orleans so that he could kill as many British as possible?
Yeah, that was a pretty extremely bloody battle
And
for the conventions of the time.
Grant known for at the end of the Civil War being very peaceful and civil and surrender.
Yeah. Yeah, two guys with very dissimilar personalities despite both being successful generals.
Indeed.
Grant wasn't afraid of a fight, though.
No, the one general that really took it to the enemy.
Mm-hmm. I still say Jackson.
Well, Jackson took it above and beyond
Yeah.
his orders in Florida.
From his height, he could probably blind Grant before Grant could do anything.
Two tough generals here, and it's going to be Andy Jackson's height and reach advantage that are going to give him the victory in hand. And that's going to move us on to the next category. Who would you hire as your lawyer if you were accused of murder? Elliott going with Grover Cleveland.
I went with William Howard Taft.
Ooh.
Taft certainly knows the law, rising to Chief Justice of the Supreme Court.
Grover Cleveland knows the law
He
too.
obviously knows the law, the Buffalo Hangman.
He was a lawyer
Grover
and
Cleveland.
a sheriff. He found himself on the final step of some unsuccessful murder defenses
Yeah,
when he was
that's-
sheriff committing the execution.
Who was the more successful law firm?
Well, I mean, in terms of just private practice as a law firm, Taft didn't spend a whole lot of a time.
He really didn't.
He was briefly a prosecutor, and then he ended up as a judge pretty early.
Yeah.
So most of his legal experience was from the bench rather than on the other side of the bar.
Yeah, that's true.
Cleveland also spent some time as an assistant district attorney and then was in private practice for probably a little bit longer than Taft. I mean, ultimately, Taft is the more distinguished legal scholar and legal mind.
Yeah, but perhaps
That's-
not the best
That's not necessary.
defense attorney.
It's not. Yeah, that's not necessarily what would make a good criminal defense lawyer, but can't hurt.
Yeah, it's a bit of a tough call.
Whom had the illegitimate child?
Cleveland.
Then maybe Cleveland. He was able to talk his way out of that for quite a long time.
Well, he was just honest about it. So, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, if it was like, hey, I've been accused of murder, and Cleveland's like, well, did you do it? And you're like, It depends on
Yeah.
whether or not you did it.
Yeah,
What your definition of was
that
is.
is. Yeah, that is a key element of this category.
Yeah, the key element is like,
Underlying
did you
it.
commit the murder?
Yeah, these two are both more upstanding and honest
Yeah,
lawyers.
indeed.
That if you're innocent, that's who you'd want.
Yeah. I think just maybe for law experience, we go Cleveland here. I mean, not law experience, but hey, like we said, Taft, he's on the other side of the bar. I don't know. It's a tough call.
Yeah, this is tough. Yeah, I think I wouldn't mind giving it to Cleveland.
I'm all right with it.
He was like staying up half the night to prepare his cases.
Yeah, he's really putting in the work. You know, it's not to say Taft didn't put in hours, but it's kind of like just a different standpoint, I guess.
Yeah, you couldn't go wrong with either of those guys, but we're going to give it to Grover Cleveland this time. And then we're going to move on to the category of First Lady Accomplishments. Elliott is going with Jacqueline Kennedy.
All right, now I'm going with Nancy Reagan.
Ooh, that's a bad pick for this round.
Well, Nancy Reagan's big accomplishment was her gimmick with the war on drugs.
Yeah.
And,
Kind of incarcerated a lot of Americans.
well, here's
for no
the thing.
reason.
She's talking about how bad drugs are while her husband's funneling crack cocaine into communities of color. There's some...
Turning
there's
a
that
blind
going on.
eye to the AIDS crisis at the same time.
Yeah, I don't know. She comes out, like, wobbling like a wounded bird and
I've heard
speaks
a,
her piece against drugs. And
Well,
I've heard a
she-
recent tale about Nancy Reagan that she used to be the blowjob queen of Hollywood.
that is the story.
does that count as a First Lady accomplishment?
Yeah, it was up to and including becoming first lady, right? So yeah.
Depending on what the blowjob queen title is, because Jackie O would be somebody that you would want to get a blowjob from. Whereas, I don't know, Nancy...
young Nancy
was-
Davis.
I've never seen a photo, I don't know.
She was good looking when she was young.
She was known for them DSLs.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe not quite in the Jackie league. But
But I mean, I'm not
sneeze
gonna
at.
say that's like an accomplishment.
That's
But
not
well, Jackie Kennedy, she redecorated and
modernized the White House and reinvented the
was-
First Lady.
she restored the White House in a historical standpoint, not just from like a interior decorating standpoint.
Well, she had to go through quite a lot too. A lot of tough times,
Yeah.
really, as first lady.
She
As
lost
our
a
listeners will
child.
recall from our most recent episode, Jackie Kennedy, number 5 on our top 5 first ladies.
Nancy Reagan not on the list, nor an honorable mention.
Yeah.
Both women able to turn a blind eye, though. Nancy to her husband's dementia. She probably didn't say too much about it. And Jackie for the rampant cheating. She was, can all happen.
Mm-hmm.
Both women had their husbands get shot while they were president. Gotta give it to Nancy. After Reagan survived the assassination attempt, she got with her astrologer and made sure that the stars aligned to prevent future assassinations. Jackie, not known to consult an astrologer, and look what happened.
That's just it. Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking we're going Jackie Kennedy here.
Yeah, I think Jackie Kennedy's gonna run away with this one.
Bet Nancy didn't see that one in the crystal ball.
Now, moving on to our next category. Who would make the best Supreme Court justice?
Well, I'm sad I played my Taft card.
Shit.
Alrighty, I'm going with James Monroe.
I lost.
Going with William McKinley. I don't know about that.
I don't know about that, to be completely honest.
Both of these men were lawyers.
Yeah.
James Monroe studied law under a young Thomas Jefferson.
Yeah, so he had a great teacher in it. He's not known as being the brightest of our founding fathers, not necessarily known for great oratory.
But as a lawyer, James Monroe, that makes me think of the quote of Aaron Burr, who, when Monroe was being put forward for president in 1816, a bitter old Aaron Burr had some negative things to say about
Oh, he
him,
does him dirty.
including, quote, as a lawyer, Monroe was far below mediocrity. He never rose to the honor of trying a case of the value of 100 pounds.
Ouch.
And Aaron Burr was a very
Very
successful
prominent
and
successful
good lawyer.
Of course, they had a little bit of beef, but
They were friends at one point.
They
but
were friends at one point.
Then not so much, and I think Aaron Burr was favoring the newly minted war hero Andy Jackson as the candidate for 1816. That never got off the ground. But
yeah, McKinley.
without knowing more about Monroe's legal career, I can't dispute what Aaron Burr said.
Right. McKinley, of course, pretty young in the Civil War, and then after that, gets into the law. And then it's not too awful long before he enters the world of politics, but...
What law school did McKinley attend?
He briefly attended Albany Law School, but did not graduate. This was an era where you could get admitted to the bar without actually graduating from law school. Law school was still a newer thing at the time. McKinley, known for not completing his education at law school or at Allegheny College.
That's right.
Yeah, I would have thought
But
that...
he did practice law for probably more going on 10 years before he really got into politics.
I mean, I don't think there's any denying Monroe had a better teacher.
I don't know. I think I'd probably go with McKinley as being a little more of an intellectual. His time in the House when he ran the tariff committee, he was, taking command of huge amounts of information.
Well, we could give it to Billy Mick.
Yeah, I think he has a little bit more of a substantial law career. Close call, though. Elliott will take that with his William McKinley card, and we will move on to the last card of this hand in the category First Lady Looks.
Well, I'm left with Bess Truman.
I think I remember this being in my favor.
Zachary Taylor.
Turn to Google Images.
As always. Bess Truman, a tough old bird, an old battle axe, solid gal.
First Lady Margaret Taylor.
Pretty hot, kind of looks like Tina Fey. They definitely took a lot of liberties in that portrait that they painted. That photo is much less becoming. Oh, wow. She did not look great there in that photo. Long face.
She's got that Victorian look. Kind of
Yeah.
Mary Shelley.
That's better. That's better.
Looks like a schoolmistress.
Yep.
She looks, she's got a scowl in her photograph.
Insanely dissatisfied.
She
which
might,
Probably got impatient having to sit still.
Yep. We got Bess Truman.
kind of has a Garfunkel haircut sort of going on. Now,
There's a young Bess Truman.
yeah, that's much better. Now, I know
somewhat of an ageist category.
in your presidential books, we have the heights and the weights of the presidents. Do we also have the measurements of the first ladies in there? Is anybody a 36, 26, 36?
Yeah. Margaret
Is that
Taylor, a
Kev-
44 double D.
I don't know if those.
That's definitely not true.
I don't know if those facts are preserved for
that-
history.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm leaning towards Bess Truman here. I don't know.
I am too. That's.
I mean, I know it's not supposed to enter into it. I just like her attitude better because she was a no-nonsense.
I was just going to say that the scowl, that off-putting temperament of Zachary Taylor's first lady is...
Yeah, I mean, you can at least see Bess Truman with like a little half smile.
Yeah, that does it for me. Neither are particularly gorgeous.
Well, they were the last card in the hand.
Indeed.
The Jackie Kennedy cards have been played. Bess Truman is going to edge it out over Margaret Taylor in the category of objectifying first ladies. We're going to move into our final 5-card hand, and then there will then be 2 final cards left. And we're going to go now to the category Biggest Election Victories. And Elliott going with William Henry Harrison.
Okay, and I went with the easy out, George Washington.
Oh.
I mean, I guess you could technically say, well, he didn't win like an election in terms of like a popular vote, but he was unanimously chosen,
Yeah.
you know.
He's chosen by the Electoral College at a time when the Electoral College votes were allocated by state legislatures. He was the unanimous choice, but nobody ran against him. Not that he ran or that there was any kind of a traditional campaign. So he didn't really run against anybody, but again, there wasn't anybody who was going to run against him.
That's it.
William Henry Harrison won a pretty
I mean, he had a pretty big victory there.
big victory in one of the most innovative campaigns
In history,
a
yeah.
transformative campaign.
Log cabin, hard cider, the great ball rolling on.
Tippecanoe and Tyler too.
Indeed.
An
And yeah, that
immortal
paid off. They
slogan.
won a pretty resounding victory over.
Going against an incumbent
MVP.
president.
All that said, I still think that GW just...
But yeah, I picked him because
Yeah.
I was like, well, I don't think there's nobody could beat him here. You know, he
He was
kinda wins it by
universal.
default. It's like him with a couple of these cards, like best president overall. Like, I mean, you could argue with Lincoln, but you know, pretty much.
There weren't many detractors for George Washington.
William Henry Harrison with 53% of the popular vote against 47 for incumbent Martin Van Buren. Electoral vote going to Harrison 234 to 60.
Yes.
Pretty huge.
Pretty huge victory.
But I mean,
Not
let's
unanimous.
assume that there was a popular vote when Washington was running, and they did things that way. Do you really think he would have done worse than that?
He would have cracked
No.
80.
You know,
Yeah, it would have been a different time even to assume that there were parties, that there would be like
yeah,
an opponent that someone could coalesce around one person to run against him. I'm sure he would have crushed whoever it was. So,
yeah, I think so.
George Washington gonna take it. Alright, our next category. Who would make the best Secretary of State? Who do we have in terms of foreign policy and diplomatic expertise?
I don't want to... Shit.
I had three real choices, but two of them kind of carry a negative light, so I ended up going Grover Cleveland.
Elliott went with Martin Van Buren,
Okay, well,
who did serve as Secretary
indeed,
of State.
indeed he did, and under no less than Andy Jackson.
No, he is not my best choice for that, actually. I have two that are better, but he's the only one that held, and I didn't want to waste my other two.
Well, it's a pretty savvy play.
Indeed, and not a bad one. Cleveland, you got, well, you know, you got the whole issue with the canal down there. Still, it's been dragging on. You got Hawaii.
Yeah, he was against annexing Hawaii.
Mm-hmm.
Asserted the Monroe Doctrine in Venezuela
Yeah.
in favor of arbitration.
Couple different foreign policy events there.
Yeah. Didn't really have any foreign policy experience outside of the presidency.
No.
Martin Van Buren serving as Secretary of State from 1829 to 31. Negotiating a commercial treaty with Turkey. Also a treaty with Great Britain to renew trade in the West Indies. And help secure reparations from France relating back to the Napoleonic Wars. And then he was also appointed ambassador to Britain, although he was not confirmed.
Right.
He went over to Britain only to be rejected in a
he
vote
had to come
engineered
back.
by John C. Calhoun.
Yeah.
which backfired on Calhoun. Van Buren then taking his job as vice president.
That's just it. Van Buren, an able Secretary of State. I mean, it led to. I mean, of course, at that time, really, the Secretary of State is the stepping stone to the presidency. And MVB.
I think he was probably the last one to do that, wasn't he?
I believe you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's pretty much the last in that line of super important, stepping stone secretaries of state. Yeah, this is probably MVB.
Yeah, I don't think any of the presidents who served as Secretary of State and then became president did a bad job when they were Secretary of State.
They couldn't have.
That would have stunted their political rise.
That's just it.
So,
he needed to be decent to get elevated to the presidency.
MVB, the MVP of this category.
Indeed.
Today. Our next category, Best Educated.
Oh, that's pretty easy.
Okay, well, I'm going to do this. Now, I don't know if we're going to factor in how educated they may strike you, but the educational opportunities that they had led me to go with George W. Bush. Oof.
Versus Barack Obama.
Yeah.
I think only JQA or Clinton could have beat anybody else in this category.
Well, some of them have had really remarkably solid educations, with some of them a little bit different.
Barack Obama, Columbia University and Harvard Law School. George W. Bush, Yale University and Harvard Business School.
Yeah.
Both kind of top of the heap in terms
Cream
of
of the crop.
Not really.
prestigious-
Wharton somewhat beats Harvard Business School routinely, but nobody really trumps Harvard Law School.
No. Yeah,
And,
and I mean,
well, I think Yale is actually
Well,
considered
Yale's-
superior to Harvard Law School.
it's probably going to depend on who you ask, but
Definitely who you ask. I think
Uh,
it is ranked ahead of them.
yeah. Well, you know what
If
we
you
think
ask
about
the
rankings.
U.S. News and World Report.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, these guys both had.
An MBA is not a JD. Technically, Obama has a doctorate.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like Obama wins because
Was Obama a Rhodes Scholar, like Clinton was before in high school?
I don't believe so.
No, he was not. He was president of the Harvard Law Review. And then he went on to be a professor of law, I believe, somewhere.
Was he involved with the Harvard Lampoon at all?
I don't think so. He did teach constitutional law at the University of Chicago. Yeah, I would say, for me, the kind of tiebreaker here between guys
Success
who
with
went
education.
to, I mean, they went to very elite institutions.
Mhm.
I'd think Obama probably,
Had a little more focus.
yeah. George W. Bush partying a lot during his undergraduate days.
Yeah.
In graduate days, and then until he wrecked the car into the house on the way home. Even though he is not the spouse in the family that killed somebody while driving.
Yeah, I think Obama was a little bit more serious about his education and then about applying it. He kind
And
of
I think
had to-
Obama had a harder upbringing, too.
Earned his
He's not
position.
necessarily coming from the political family that
Right.
George W. Bush is coming from.
Or the
Going-
donation to Harvard or Yale that gets you into the school.
Yeah, I mean, well, I think Obama's father. Let me see. Obama's father was at Harvard as well, but he wasn't exactly the kind of a prestigious legacy admission that Bush would have been
Yeah.
at Yale.
Yeah.
And, the Obama, he wasn't exactly like poor in his upbringing, but he did have to like go out and get a job for himself.
That's it. And
Whereas-
he went through that partying phase and rose above it. George W. Bush, I mean, he did the same thing, but it took him longer. I mean, there's a point where George W. Bush is pulled over under the influence and his friends in the passenger seat, like, do you know who his dad is?
Yeah. In Texas,
You know.
he got a DUI in 1979.
I don't know the exact year.
Something like that.
He had a Dewey, though, before you could blow into a machine.
Mhm.
Back when I don't believe there were open container laws even.
Well, a lot of time, you know.
Pretty tough to get a Dewey then.
Yeah.
I'm going to go with Obama here. I'm leaning against myself.
I would agree with that. Barack Obama. Taking it from George W. Bush. The next category. Who would you rather have date your daughter? Each of these contestants had 2 presidents to choose from. Elliott went with Theodore Roosevelt.
Wow. And I went with Jimmy Carter.
Wow.
Oh, God.
That's a pretty epic clash.
It is.
These 2 having gone head-to-head on post-presidential accomplishments a couple of times.
That's right. And I think with different results in each discussion. But here we are with who would you rather have date your daughter. Now, my daughter brings home Jimmy Carter. It's like, oh, okay. You know, you learn about the family background. Okay, they got a peanut farm. All right, so he knows about hard work. He's in the Navy. Not an unintelligent guy. Just a warm person. Just a good guy all around. You know, he's only going to lust in his heart, not in real life. He admitted to lusting in his heart, but, you know, didn't follow through with any of that chicanery.
Theodore Roosevelt is definitely not going to lust anywhere outside of his legitimate spouse.
Or his lust for blood
Well,
from animals.
there's nothing wrong with that.
Well,
Unless maybe your daughter
that is
doesn't
a way
wanna...
of dealing with a deep depression after your wife and daughter die within a few hours of each other.
Yeah,
That
Oh,
might be...
his mother and his wife
Ah, okay.
right.
died in the same house on the same day.
Same day.
Within hours, yeah.
So he kind of lost it after that and killed a bunch of animals forever to...
Yeah, but Roosevelt was very adamantly opposed to infidelity. He was very ashamed by his brother's dalliances, and
Yeah, that's for sure. And I
much-
mean, he's got a solid family background. I mean, if it's like, oh, you're bringing home a Roosevelt,
That would be
shit,
the
girl,
only
run away
thing.
with that.
That would be the only thing that I would think would pull one way over the other.
yeah.
The money. Like, this is an honest, humble background, and then the Roosevelts, I mean, they're Roosevelts.
That's an honest background from a non-humble background.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Roosevelts have got money. They've got a name. Your daughter would be set for life. Your grandchildren would have trust funds.
And I would
but-
selfishly
you would
be rubbing my hands
Yeah.
together thinking I could get a piece of that. I'm going to make sure that she gets pregnant, and then I'm going to put the screws to them, get some of that money for myself.
Yeah.
Jimmy goes to sea on a nuclear submarine. Teddy goes to sea on a yacht.
Teddy, also a military veteran.
That's true. Yeah, he's
he's a
going out
very
to...
impressive guy. Harvard, very well educated, and then just look at what a lot of his sons did. I mean, they were all pretty accomplished. If you want to think about how your grandchildren will turn out if their father is Teddy Roosevelt, you can be sure that they're going to be pushed to succeed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think both of these guys are solid picks, but I think I mean, at least from my standpoint as a father, if my daughter came home with Jimmy Carter one weekend, I'd be like, well, he seems nice, he's cool. And then she came home with Teddy Roosevelt, I'd be like, this guy's kind of annoying. He's really loud and really animated, but there's a real sense of security that comes with that.
Technically, he could have come home in a Mercedes-Benz because they existed at that point.
Would he have, though? No. He would have come up
He
on
did have a
horseback.
Tiffany knife.
Oh, that's it. He had
Yeah.
Tiffany knife, Tiffany cufflinks on his, Western gear and everything, and that's why he got picked on by the legitimate cowboys, but he proved himself.
Yep.
He's a tough bird, and, there's no denying it. I feel like my daughter is safe in the hands of Teddy Roosevelt. I mean, that's not knocking Jimmy Carter, but...
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I ever heard anything about anything that would tend to think that TR was anything other than loving to his wife, and
he was totally devoted to his
and
wife.
getting along with her.
To the point where he never spoke about her again after she died, and then with his second wife, again, devoted.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
To be fair, though, he didn't have the scrutiny of all of the media that Carter had to go through.
Well, Carter
Carter-
pretty much remained happily married his whole life, you know.
Yeah.
And he had that Playboy interview where he admitted to lusting in his heart that they tried to make a big deal out of. But my God, is that so rated G in terms of what other people that have become president have done.
Yeah.
You know?
But in 1909, you could have had an entire second family literally 6 blocks away. Because they didn't have quick photos.
Well, TR had media scrutiny as well, but he also
was a master.
I mean, he was a master of the media, and he kind of used that to help. I mean, he got them to kind of back off of his family at times.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't call Jimmy Carter a master of the media. I mean, I think he just tried to be himself, be honest. Yeah, I'm leaning towards Teddy Roosevelt. I think I'd be more impressed with him, probably.
Yeah,
that's not to take anything away from Jimmy Carter, but
I think part of the category is that we're allowed to take into account, like, I mean, knowing what they become throughout their life, and obviously, I mean, TR, one of the better presidents, pretty successful, and
Jimmy Carter's not on
tried.
Mount Rushmore.
Yeah, Jimmy Carter not on Mount Rushmore. TR coming from a very impressive family.
I mean, bless his heart, Jimmy Carter, still with us, still a devoted fan and listener of the podcast. But sorry, Jimmy, I don't think we could give this one to you. Yeah, I think I'm leaning towards Teddy Roosevelt.
I do think Jimmy was probably genuinely a better person, though.
Probably.
Yeah, but I would think that...
Actually, I have very little doubt that he was a better person. But, like, you know, it's just you're thinking of, like, financial stability.
That's the only thing that...
he's a
God, it would
Roosevelt,
be so nice to have an in-ground pool in 1912.
Mm-hmm.
It would be so sick to go swimming in a full suit.
Can't pass up on the chance for our daughter to become Mrs. Roosevelt.
That's it.
TR is going to take the hand. In the next category, most underrated.
Ah, shit.
Well, I'm left with Rutherford Hayes.
Yeah, it's a tough...
I think Elliott's got it here. He's got
with
John Tyler.
Yeah.
In terms of determining how they are rated, we turn to the C-SPAN amalgamation of historian rankings here. This one puts John Tyler at 39,
Which is
above
pretty
only
ludicrous.
Warren Harding, Franklin Pierce, Andrew Johnson, and James Buchanan.
Pretty crazy.
That's about as low as you could possibly put him. This is from 2017. It doesn't include our 45th or 46th presidents.
And that's it. And you got Rutherford Hayes at 32, sandwiched between Zachary Taylor and George W. Bush.
Also,
So both underrated.
rather low. Both could be a little bit higher.
Yeah. But I mean, John Tyler at 39 is probably more underrated
Yeah, I think he's one
than
of the...
Hayes at 32. Hayes is your classic kind of middle of the road sort of president. I mean, in our research, he's come up a little bit in my mind. So when I'm looking at middle of the road presidents, I'm putting him a little bit higher than I would. But having John Tyler at 39
I think
is
we've-
ridiculous.
I think we've had John Tyler pegged as being underrated for a while, and he had some pretty impressive foreign policy accomplishments during
Given the
his
climate
presidency.
he came in,
What he did just to take office and insist that he is the president was very important. I mean, a lot of vice presidents ascending after him would have been screwed if he had
write him
laid
off.
down. He did a pretty good job for what he was thrown into. I don't know. I really don't see how you are calling him a bottom tier president, in to the extent that it is here.
yeah.
So I think John Tyler's more underrated on here than Rutherford B. Hayes. And that takes us to the final 2 cards. It all comes down to this.
That's it.
The choices are narrow. And the first of the last 2 categories is biggest partier. Elliott going with fabulous Frankie Pierce.
And I'm going with LBJ.
Oh,
LBJ, I mean, he had some political backslapping. He could get rowdy, I'm sure. He was one of the boys. But
LBJ would be drinking a beer while he's going for a Sunday drive.
yeah, in
Yeah.
his aquatic car, and he'd scare the poop out of whatever
Amphicar.
senator was with him as he drove into the pond saying the brakes had failed.
Yeah, he knew how to have a good time.
He did, but he was more of a bully, really. I mean, he would use his size to intimidate people because he got a rise out of it, and he had no qualms about stripping down to the nude in front of people, having important meetings while he's sitting on the john having a crap. But none of that really equates to partying. It just means he gave no fucks. Franklin Pierce, a notorious presidential partier.
a lot
Even if
of
he
it was
kind of a
drinking
lightweight.
because his son died, though, right?
Well, once you got
At
to
a
that
certain
point,
Prior to that, he was drinking.
I mean, he's
for-
known for being,
He was our number one drunkest president.
yeah,
Yeah.
he's
By
having
the
a
end-
really good time
by
when
the
his
end of
wife's
his-
not around, and
By the end of his life, he was sad, lonely,
Just
drinking
sad,
himself
lonely
to death.
alcoholic,
But
yeah.
in his earlier days, he was having it up in college, and then his early
yeah, when he's
days
in
in
Bowdoin,
Congress,
he's partying. When he's in Congress,
he's partying with Nathaniel Hawthorne
Mm-hmm.
in college. And then, his early days in Congress, his wife staying back home in New Hampshire, and he's on his own in D.C.
yeah, he could party with impunity.
having a good time.
I don't think much question that Franklin Pierce takes this one.
Yeah.
I mean, LBJ, I'm sure he had drinks and stuff with people, and he got drunk and stuff too, I'm sure, but not on like the storybook level of Franklin Pierce. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Lyndon Johnson, if he was drunk, he handled it well enough that it wasn't like a serious issue.
Franklin Pierce partying so hard that it becomes a serious issue, which
Yeah.
is ultimately bad if you're Franklin Pierce, but good if you're playing him in this category.
That's it.
Frankie Pierce taking it, which brings us to the final category. Final category: who would make the best Attorney General?
All right.
I'm left with James A. Garfield.
James Madison,
Well,
Wow.
yeah.
sponsor of the Bill of Rights.
No, I'm not gonna knock Garfield. I think he'd be all right, but man, James Madison. Ugh. I mean,
I think last game we had Abe Lincoln in this category.
Yeah.
James
Ooh.
Madison could be sneakily one of the top cards to play here.
I agree.
Father of the Constitution.
Yeah.
Especially the Attorney General in his era before there was a real big Justice Department. And
Yeah, that's
the
another
Attorney
thing that
General
could be
was
said.
kind of like the president's lawyer who was giving him advice on what's constitutional and what's not. I mean,
Yeah.
you can't beat James Madison in that category for
No.
that time. James Garfield also very well educated, spent time as a lawyer, very intelligent guy, would be definitely a good attorney general.
Yeah, I think he'd be pretty solid. I just, you're going up against James Madison.
Yeah,
I
Madison
think that's what it comes down to.
on a legendary level in terms of his mastery of the Constitution,
That's just it.
the Bill of Rights. I mean, the president wants to know what the Bill of Rights means. There's no better person to ask than Madison.
Yeah.
I mean, nowadays when people try to interpret the Constitution, some people still want to figure out what Madison would have thought about it, as if
Yeah.
that's a decisive question.
Indeed. I mean, I think it's no question. James Madison.
Elliott taking it.
Kind of had a lucky two go at the end there for the last two that sorted out that way.
Yeah, well, that's gonna bring us to the card count, and we'll be back with the results.
And we're back with the results.
I finished with 16,
28.
making Elliott a return champion.
Elliott now
At Presidential
Undefeated.
against both of us. He's 2-0, and overall our guests are now 5-0. Somehow we invented this game and then get our asses kicked by the guests every time.
Them's the breaks in Presidential War. But as always, a fun and exciting game to enjoy with friends for good times and enlightening discussion. That's the game here. And we'll be back with more exciting installments in the future. For the Dead Presidents Podcast, I want to extend a thank you to Elliott Burns for returning to the game. Congratulations on your victory.
Thank you.
But of course, the true victor, always the listeners. And as always, I'm Stephen Lincoln Douglas.
And I'm James J. Hamilton.
Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.